Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today, I am joined by another guest coming off of the Twitterverse. I am joined by Ammourazz. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good today. Yeah.
I have been following your account for a while. I can't remember how I stumbled across your account, but I definitely enjoy everything that you put out, whether it's tabletop gaming related, podcast related, or anything in between.
Oh, thank you, and I'm really glad to be on here. I don't remember how exactly I stumbled on your podcast, but the episodes I've listened to have been A+ all around.
Oh, wonderful. I'm always happy to hear that people listen to the podcast. It's funny when I check stats, and I'm like, I can see people are downloading them, but I don't hear anything from anybody about the episodes.
I found a couple of my people that I know who've been on here, so I started there, and I just kind of got hooked from the folks I knew, so I started listening to all the folks I didn't know as well.
Oh, well, that is a great plan. I know that I've had a number of people from like the Twitter tabletop role-playing community on the podcast, so that's always an A+ way to start off if you're on Twitter and in that community. There's a number of fandoms that you've got, and we talked about narrowing it down, and then you were like, there's one that I didn't even list, and I don't know why I didn't list it. And I love this movie. I love the world that it's in. I know that there's a comic book that it spun off from, I believe.
Comic book that's completely different, but...
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
But the fandom that it is Big Hero 6. And I fell in love with the movie. Like, it's one of those movies that came out of nowhere, and it was just impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really cool movie. And I fell in love with it instantly. A, because it's just kind of funny, and really well written and emotionally powerful. B, I was Hero's age when it came out. Hiro Hamada, the main character.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also, like, I study engineering and robotics personally. So I had just come into that interest around the time the movie came out. So it was just sort of perfectly tailored for me on release.
Oh, that is awesome. I love when things overlap like that, where just like you connect with a character and you get to see that character and just be like, that's how I am. Like that's the person that I want to be is doing that. And, you know, especially like for in engineering and seeing the stuff that they are showing in the movie.
Yeah, it's a super cool future. And I love all the science and technology that's shown in it because it's different than a lot of stock sci-fi and like future tech fare. It's got a very grounded sort of in what's more realistic and possible with what we know from modern science. So I kind of found that a lot. Found that very interesting and engaging to hook on to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, have you read the comics just out of curiosity? Because I didn't know that there was comics until after the movie came out.
Me neither. And no, I haven't read them. What I do know about them is that, as far as I'm aware, the comics don't have the same sort of sciencey bent to it, where, like, in the movie, all the heroes have their powers from these technology-based suits that are based on sort of their own fields of study and the inventions they were working on. In the movie, or in the comics, a lot of it is just more standard comic fare, where, like, Fredzilla is actually a person who turns into a giant fire-breathing lizard, not a costume that jumps really high and breathes fire. Stuff like that. And, like, that's really cool, but I think what really draws me to the movie and later on the series is that it's so grounded, quote unquote, in reality. Like, obviously there's a lot of fiction and comic camp to it, but it's never, oh, this person just shows up with the ability to shoot lasers out of their arm.
Right, exactly. And when we were talking before we started recording, and we were just talking about Big Hero 6, you had turned me on to the show because I remember they were talking about Big Hero 6 on, I think it was like Disney Channel for airing. And it was something that my kids are old enough to watch stuff, but they're getting out of like the Disney Channel, watching Disney Channel on TV. They're more geared towards like Netflix or whatnot. And it was one of those shows that I never got to watch with them. But you recommended it, and I loaded up the first episode, I think about a week or two ago, and I was number one, I was impressed by the art style that they went with,
Yeah.
but the second was it's coming almost directly off of the movie. Like it's
Yep.
like
The
within a
first
day or so.
the first episode actually is the ending montage of the movie. The ending montage ends with that line of "Who are we? We're Big Hero 6." The second
Mhm.
episode ends with that line. So the first two episodes show what was just a brief montage at the end of the movie and expand on that.
Oh wow! See, because I haven't gone to that second episode yet, but the first episode, I'm like, they're doing the hug. He's going
Yeah.
off to the school, and like that. Like I was instantly like because I love the movie so much. It's just like I need to watch that show. It's one of those shows where I've got it on my list of when I have my downtime, I need to keep watching it.
Yeah, it's a really good show, and it just gets better. The first two episodes are pretty grounded in everything we know. They introduce the big villain for the season by name, and then they sort of just stick close to what we expect from the movie. But afterwards, it creates its own identity. Like it sticks to that same core of these characters and of their superhero team and what they do and why they matter, but it just leans further and further into comic book camp in a way that I absolutely adore.
Oh, definitely. Out of curiosity, I know that they have 2 seasons. Are they doing more, or is it kind of like over for now?
We're still airing the second season right now.
Oh,
So
okay.
an episode aired yesterday actually. That was really fun. But they have, I think, two more episodes in the season, which are the finale called Legacies, part 1 and 2.
Awesome.
And then we haven't, I think they've already confirmed the season 3. I think they confirmed it even before season 2 was done.
I
Uh,
am looking at Wikipedia right now on my phone, and it does say a 3rd season is confirmed, which is really impressive for a Disney Disney show
yeah,
to go to that 3rd season. Because generally, the with their cartoon series, at least, they kind of cut them off after 2 or 3 seasons.
yeah. And considering they kept all the original cast minus Fred, who they recast, but they I'm fairly certain they kept every other cast member the same from the movie.
That is awesome. I that's one of those things that whenever they do spin off of movies to shows, you kind of lose those main voices, and you have to learn to enjoy the ones that they cast. But that's really cool that they kept everybody, with the exception of Fred in the series.
Yeah. Uh, and I think it really adds to what makes the movie so good. Is the ensemble cast is just great. Every one of them have such well crafted personalities that hit a lot of kind of tropes, but subvert them in very, I want to say, mature ways. Like Gogo is the classic pessimist loner, sits in the corner and doesn't talk to anyone trope. And
Hmm.
yet she, like, especially when you contrast her to Honey Lemon, who is this optimist, open, like touchy-feely person. Uh but Gogo is never the like closed off from her friends. She's always there emotionally in the way she is able to be. Like after the big fight on the island in the movie, she's the first person to hug Hero after Hero
Hmm.
like messes up hard. And it's a lot of really small, interesting details of the characters that the cast brings to shine as well that I think is wonderful.
Yeah, it is one of those things where I love comic books and I love comic book movies, and I feel like Big Hero 6 stands apart from a lot of them just based on how well that they did their characters
Yeah.
and the relationship between all of them.
Yeah. It's really interesting that I think my two of my top like comic book movies besides Black Panther are animated, which is this and Spider-Verse, which are both just phenomenal films.
Oh
Uh
gosh, I could
yeah.
go on to Spider-Verse for like hours of how much I
Yes.
love that movie. It'd just be me saying I love that movie so much. It's the best comic book movie I've seen in years.
Yeah, it's amazing. But I think what I love about the series is it gives them the room to explore a lot of the things that comic book movies don't don't always get to explore, and what I think's been lacking from a lot of the Marvel shows. Like I love all the Marvel shows pretty much. I mean, there's been some pretty bad misses, but for the most part, they've been really good. But they have a very specific tone. Like most of Netflix ones have been serious and like heavy topic exploration shows.
Hmm.
But the Big Hero 6 show is just allowed to be this fun, campy experience where the villains have titles like Globby, Noodle Burger Boy, High Voltage, uh, Mad Jacks, and they're just all this amalgam of weird, wacky villains.
Yeah, it's something where, and you said you said it about the world, like the world that they exist in is something where I hope when I watch it, I hope I get to know more about it because it's just so unique where it's got this amalgamation between San Francisco and Tokyo, like it's
Yeah.
just that merged kind of style.
Yeah. There's a lot of really cool aesthetic details to that get woven in just subtly into the world building of it. And it's a beautiful city shot every time you see it. Anytime just they're flying across the city, you're like, this is a good looking city. I'd love to live here.
Absolutely. Live
Uh,
there, eat there, like give me some of that food.
yeah. I think the thing that really sets apart the show to me is that despite that campiness, though, they still maintain a lot of the emotional core of the movie. There are moments that still grapple Hero dealing with the big, big emotional core of the movie, his grief and his loss there, and like there's one moment in each season where Hero visits the main villain from the movie in jail, and it's probably one of the best representations of sort of the concepts of grief and forgiveness that I've ever seen in a piece of media.
Oh wow, that's high praise.
Yeah.
That is, again, like, I guess growing up when I was younger and Disney would always do like, okay, here's Aladdin. Oh, here's the Aladdin TV series or the Little Mermaid TV series. And it was never really taken seriously. It was always just like something that they did to kind of just have that property still out there for people to watch and come home to after school. But the Big Hero 6 cartoon sounds just so much like on a different level completely of what they previously had been putting out.
Yeah, it also seems like it's almost opposite to that in the fact that they don't really advertise it anywhere. I don't think most people know it existed, even folks who really love the movie.
Hmm.
And until Disney Plus, it wasn't really accessible anywhere except on their own like Disney Now or Disney Go thing or whatever.
Exactly.
So it's just it existed. You could find it on the internet the same way you could find anything else on the internet, but they didn't make an effort to put it out there.
Yeah, I remember when before it started airing, I remember the previews for it, like the little like teasers of, oh, this is coming. But I feel like that's the way that Disney handles a lot of their animated properties that they're targeting for kids, is that they hype it up before it starts airing, but then when it's actually on, there's not really a mention of it. And
Yeah.
there's not really advertise, like you don't see anything about it on the net. I don't see any advertisements for it. I don't see anything targeted like on Twitter, on Facebook, anywhere where I'm talking about Big Hero 6 or looking stuff up. It's rare to stumble across something where it's referencing the show.
Which is a shame because like Disney has a decent amount of good animation that people talk about a lot, like DuckTales, a lot of the Star Wars animated stuff, which
Hmm.
is all out there and discussed and really good stuff. And this one just seems to have fallen under the wire in that regard.
And that is just, I don't know, like so crazy. It boggles my mind when Disney can invest so much money in producing what they produce and yet not promote it how they should have it be promoted.
Yeah. But I mean, it's out there, and if you have access to Disney Plus, I would highly recommend the first season if you do like comic stuff, if you like stuff like Teen Titans and Young Avengers and that genre of teenage superhero struggles. It's very good.
Oh, absolutely. And have seen the first episode, so it's got me hooked to the point where I'm ready to start watching more of it and just fitting it into my schedule. And the great thing about it is each episode's 20 minutes.
Yep. 20-minute episodes, pretty self-contained, really well done. Like, there's some plot threads that start coming together, but it doesn't become too big a deal towards the later half of the season. So it kind of eases you into it. But the main villain for season 1, it hits the sort of archetype of Lex Luthor or Kingpin or Thinker, like that mastermind behind the scenes pulling all the strings.
Mhm.
But it's really well done that when things come together and when the final confrontation happens, they've earned all the reveals.
Okay. Awesome. Now, I do have to ask, who's your favorite character in Big Hero 6?
Oof. I mean, I think, like I mentioned before, I just love what they've done with the archetype of who Gogo is. Like, I love Hero. I love him and his go-gettedness and his just attitude, but I definitely identify more with Gogo as a person. Like, Gogo definitely has a lot of really cool traits because I feel like of the group, even though she externally projects an attitude of perhaps having some issues to work through, she is one of the most put together of the group. She's open and communicative, and she's great, and she's also cool as hell. Like, her skating is cool. She's always the most competent in fights. She's just cool. That's it.
Yeah, she is the one where when I was watching the movie, it felt like Gogo and Wasabi were like the mom and dad of the group.
Yep.
And yeah, like especially with Go, like she's so, like as you said, like she's the first person to like give Hero the hug, and it feels like she's always the one who's just like trying to take care of them and make sure that
Yeah.
they're all right.
Even if she'll never acknowledge it or will act like closed off from it, she still does it because she still cares and she still communicates that in the way she knows how. And honestly, that's the thing I appreciate about the show is it never tries to force Gogo to be who she's not. Like, in the show throughout, all the friends acknowledge who they are and never try to force one another to be someone that they aren't. They acknowledge, like, that Gogo and Honey Lemon are completely different personalities, and that's both okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm just going to reiterate what you said. If you don't know about Big Hero 6, the animated series, come join us, watch it, and then talk about it in places where people that are other than us can know about it and get more people involved, because it's something that, man, I'd love to see it be represented more across the entire spectrum of what I like consume on the internet.
And like, if you don't, if going a step back, if you haven't seen the movie, I would also just highly recommend that as a beautiful piece of media.
Oh gosh, the movie is wonderful.
Yeah.
So on top of Big Hero 6 as an animated feature, there's another fandom that you're into that's also kind of been dominating since like the 90s, which it blows my mind because I remember when it first came to the States, and I remember being voluntold to kind of watch it on videotape so I could talk to the kids when we rented it out at Blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
Pokemon, video games, movies, TV shows, it's card game.
It's in other video games, it's everywhere.
How did you first get into Pokemon? Like, what is your Pokemon story?
So I'm trying to remember. I don't remember whether I started off the video game or just watching the shows on TV, but I do know that the first game I played was Leaf Green on the Game Boy Advance way back when.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess 13 years ago now. And I played that game, made it through most of the game until I caught a Starmie, and then ignored every other Pokemon but a Starmie. And won the game with Starmie, because you could beat the game with one Pokemon if you just overleveled it. And I kind of used Charizard sometimes, but it was always Starmie. And after that, I just kind of watched a lot of the shows. When I was a kid, it was Diamond and Pearl that was airing on TV. So I would catch that pretty much daily. and I eventually picked up the Platinum game. And after that, I watched through most of the Black and White show. Then I fell out of Pokemon for a bit. There was a bit where I actually played some competitive Pokemon online. My cousin got me into it, and I ended up joining a forum and doing like an online gym run where they had assigned, like, people had battled for the right to be gym leaders at the best of the monotype, and you could beat them all to get the badges. So I did the entire run with a water type monotype team because that's just who I became. Because water types are the best Pokemon, and I love them all, and they're all perfect. Yes, even Psyduck, especially Psyduck.
Psyduck is my favorite. He's my favorite Pokemon.
Psyduck is great. But yeah, and then I kind of fell out of it for most of high school because I didn't own a Nintendo console again until recently. So I stopped playing the games and I stopped catching the shows, even though I'd heard really good things about a lot of the seasons in between. And it's only been in this past year or so that I started rewatching a lot of the shows.
It is definitely something where, again, looking back and seeing the show come out and then the card games and movies, and you're wondering how long Pokemon is going to go for. And I remember distinctly a couple of years ago, my kids, we finally let them have access to like Netflix and letting them wake up in the mornings and just go watch something. And I remember hearing the Pokemon theme song, and I'm like, okay, this is strange, but they've now found Pokemon. And then when they got their DSs for Christmas one year, each of them got like Pokemon Sun or Pokemon Moon.
Yeah.
And I have 3 kids, so 2 of them got one of them, and then the other kid and I picked up the other set. So there's 2 suns and 2 moons, and I'm playing it, and I haven't played since Pokemon Yellow, and I haven't watched Pokemon since probably like early 2000s. So I have no idea who these Pokemon are.
And Sun and Moon had the national decks, right? Like it had all the Pokemon.
I think so. Yeah. So I had no clue who 90% of the Pokemon were, because I remember it used to be just 150 something Pokemon, or then they'd increase it every like couple seasons, and it blew me away. I'm like, I don't know who these are. I'm just going to play for them to have a trading partner.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't think Pokemon's going away anytime soon. I don't think it's gonna lose what makes it special, because like you watch the reception to Sword and Shield, and it took over most of my friend circles for a while when it came out.
Yeah, a lot of the people I watch on Twitch had at least 1 or 2 of their streaming days be run-throughs of Sword or Shield, and they're still doing it and waiting for the DLC to come out, so that way they can keep going through the story and catch more Pokemon.
And yeah, and I love the games. I've been enjoying Sword and Shield a lot. The dress-up options have been a lot of fun. Characters are still great. I love Nessa.
Yes.
I think for me, though, the love of Pokemon has always been the anime. Like, after playing the games and watching the shows, I watched through all of Indigo League. Like, I streamed it with my sister online way back when I was a kid, and I've been rewatching. The show is just a really good piece of media, considering how like the usual standard for this is a video game movie or show isn't super high. Pokemon is an exception.
It's one of those shows where, and I think back because I used to watch, like, I watched the first several years of Pokemon up through, I don't know, at least the 3rd or 4th movie that came out, and there's always something where I'd watch them on videotape or DVD whenever they would release the seasons, because we'd get them in at Blockbuster and I'd watch them so that way I could talk to people about them. And for one of the things that I always loved was the characters of Jesse and James, because they start and they're totally ridiculous, but
they are. I think they never try not to be. They just lean into it.
Exactly. But I feel that they have some of the best character arcs in Pokemon as far as the human characters, where you get to see them have those pains from childhood or their relationships with the other characters or with Team Rocket and with themselves, and it's just so nice to see them, get sometimes they don't get their wins, but they get that moment for each other.
Yeah. Their best moments are always the moments where they just go on to cheer Ash in the gym, or like cheer on Charizard and Pikachu and be like, "You got this." It's like, wait, hold on, are you the villains or?
I remember the biggest thing that I had heard when they were doing the Pokemon Sun and Moon series was they actually won a battle against Ash, and it made it into some of the different websites that I follow. They said
Yeah.
it's official, like Team Rocket actually won a battle against Ash, and I
Yeah.
was like, I need to watch it. I need to find it because I still haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've watched a specific one where they won, but like in Sun and Moon, they have a Mimikyu who really just wants to like beat Pikachu, uh, and is obscenely strong, and has come close if the battle hadn't been interrupted a bunch of times. If I might have already watched the time where like Mimikyu beats Pikachu, it's like that Mimikyu is strong. But yeah, like I think it's really interesting all the different ways they go with the show. And one of the really interesting things I've actually noticed is the differences in genres between the seasons. Like, they're all still Pokemon shows, and they're all still about friendship and learning from one another and your bonds with your Pokemons and your friends and one another. But you start with like Indigo League, and it's this very emotionally heavy show. Like, you watch and you're crying at once every 4 episodes probably. Uh, like between just moments like Bye Bye Butterfree and
Mhm.
Charmander in the Rain and all the various emotional beats in that show. Um, and then like I haven't seen it myself, but from what I know of X and Y, it's basically a shonen anime show. And then from what I've watched in Sun and Moon is the slice of life anime where like Ash
Mhm.
is going to school and it's not him traveling across the country to do gym battles. He's just going to school every day and hanging out with an ensemble of cast of friends, uh, who all get sort of their own arcs and episodes that are really cool.
That is an interesting observation because I didn't ever catch it because again I stopped at a certain point and I've seen bits and pieces of the Sun and Moon, and I know my kids have tried to find older series and it's hard for them to kind of track down
Yeah.
unless they've got it on somewhere, but they yeah, they were super into Sun and Moon, and I kept looking at it, I don't know who these characters are.
Yeah. And honestly, I think like Sun and Moon does a really good job of onboarding you onto the show, because it doesn't follow that same sort of journey format or assumes you know all the people you've met in a lot of the other journeys or whatnot. There is
Mhm.
one episode where they go back to Kanto, and if you've watched Indigo League, it's just a straight up nostalgia trick because Misty and Brock are there to greet Ash and the friends as they go back, and like Ash goes and sees all the Pokemon he caught. Because they go to Professor Oak's house where literally every Pokemon he sent was. So it's just a nostalgia trick if you've watched Indigo League, but otherwise it's still a cool episode. But yeah, the show does a lot of interesting stuff with regards to genre, because and they try to tell some of the same stories. I think one of the interesting things they did was Diamond and Pearl is them sort of reimagining Indigo League, but with more modern technology. In terms of like their animation budget, it seems, where they go a lot bigger on battles. Like when I was rewatching Indigo League, most of the battles aren't that long. Like even the big gym battles aren't super long.
Mhm.
Whereas Diamond and Pearl and onwards, they sort of start having sometimes 1 to 2 episode battles. Um, and it's interesting how that affects the storytelling. Sometimes it makes it hit a lot more powerfully. Sometimes it feels like just kind of a shallow copy of a past season, but it's just sort of a fun thing to watch.
I really again I have so many different shows that I'd love to get into, but Pokemon is one of those ones where it's so easy to just put on
Yeah.
and because I work from home, so I'm working and can kind of casually listen or watch, and it feels like one of those shows I could definitely put on in the background and just kind of absorb it as it's going through.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to ask you, because you have been watching the Pokemon series for such a long time, is I always see the story come up about, like, is Ash's mom and Professor Oak, are like they together? Because they talk about like going on vacation and there's pictures of them together, and I
Yeah.
just want to ask a Pokemon fan about that.
That is a good question, and honestly, like in a couple seasons I have watched, it's never been a focus. And in fact, in Sun and Moon, Ash's mom doesn't really interact with Professor Oak, but rather she goes on vacation with Mr. Mime. So I'm just gonna, yeah. Like whenever she goes to visit Ash at school, she's always there, and Mr. Mime's wearing a Hawaiian shirt and like a sun hat, and like it's a sight. You haven't seen, and you haven't lived until you've seen a Mr. Mime on vacation in a Hawaiian island, or I think
No.
you have lived as long as you've avoided it. I'm not sure which it is.
One of the things I'm curious about is what draws you to the water type Pokemon.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't actually know where it started beyond just like really loving Starmie as a Pokemon. Uh, I just enjoy just that giant starfish. And when I did, like, for a while when I played competitive, uh the water type team was just one that I did the best with, that like fit my playstyle really well. But as I've like continued, I just really appreciate the variety in the water type Pokemon, because there's so many of them, from just a fish that turns into a giant dragon to all the cool designs of the starter Pokemon that are like a variety of incredibly cute tiny babies to giant turtle with cannons.
Mhm.
And just like I'm a person in general who likes swimming and enjoys the beach a lot, so I think it just kind of is a sum of parts rather than a specific thing.
Okay. I can respect that. I mean, I identified with Psyduck because I used to get headaches a lot, and it's like, yeah, I am right there with you. That, and just like generally popping out and being annoying to Misty.
Yep. I think it also helped that all my favorite trainers in the show were either water type trainers like Misty, or Lana in Sun and Moon, or had water type starters like Dawn in Diamond and Pearl. Like all the characters, and like Oshawott in Black and White is one of my favorite depictions of a Pokemon in the show, because he's just this reckless little energetic tiny otter who runs around and causes more trouble for himself than he solves. And like Buizel in Diamond and Pearl is one of the coolest characters that I just, a bunch of water types in the show has always caught my eye versus most of the other Pokemon.
Very cool. I think that's one of the greatest things about Pokemon. And again, I can't imagine doing a Poke Rap with as many Pokemon as there are now. But
It
I love
exists.
this. It does?
Yeah, so I'm gonna, give me a second. Brian David Gilbert, I believe. Yeah. So Brian David Gilbert, who does stuff on Polygon, very popular in my friend group. I can't say anything else about him except that he went on a quest to create the ultimate Pokerap. And he presented it, I believe, at E3 like 2019.
Oh my goodness.
It's a creation. He cheats a lot, but he does it. He enlists the audience at one point where he just puts out like 500 names on the screen and says, everyone just start reading random names. Eventually we'll hit them all. And does that for like 10 seconds. And then continues on. But the parts that he does do are really good. They're a really well-written rap.
I will have to look that up, because I mean, I remember listening to the Poke Rap way back when it's just the 151.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine it now, but I think that the thing that keeps Pokemon going, number one, is just it's everywhere in any form that you want to play it, watch it, consume it. But I think, you know, those designs of the Pokemon characters themselves are just there's at least one Pokemon for everybody. You will find that Pokemon and be like, I love this Pokemon.
Yeah. And they do a really good job of, like, I know there was a lot of people, like, controversy around Sword and Shield not having a full national Dex, but honestly, I think that does a really good job of making it more accessible. Like, there's a lot of people who or kids who have never played Pokemon, or adults who want to get back into Pokemon but see 1,000 Pokemon and are like, and having a game that limits the amount of Pokemon and helps onboard you slowly, I think is a really useful thing to make it more enjoyable for anyone who hasn't touched Pokemon before in a really long time.
Absolutely. And I know that there's a lot of again a lot of division about how they kept a number of Pokemon out of the game, but with the DLCs coming, they're adding Pokemon back into the game. Yeah. And it just seems like it lends itself that it's maybe will get to that stage after a year or 2 years, depending on how long they keep supporting Sword and Shield.
Yeah, I also think it's really interesting that, like, when I played Leaf Green, by the time you made it to like Misty's gym, you really only had one grass type option if you wanted to fight her. If you didn't take Ivysaur, the type, you just, like, I took Charizard, so I was kind of not in a good place. So I had to train up 3 Bellsprouts to fight that gym, who then stayed in my computer forever because I didn't want to use a Bellsprout. But with Sword and Shield in the wild area, there are so many Pokemon that you can choose from right off the bat that I went to the first gym in the game with a team of 6 water types.
Oh my goodness.
Because there's so much diversity and choice in a way that I haven't really seen in another Pokemon game. So I just rolled up and I'm like, I already have a full team of 6 water types. I'm ready. Let's do this.
Yeah, that is something that I definitely love with that implementation of that wild area, where you get to see some of the Pokemon if you want to go after them and try to snag them to add to your team, rather than, you know, the RNG of I hope I run into this one. I've got a 0.5% chance.
Yep. There's also nothing quite as scary as being chased down by, like, an Onix as you first enter the wild area, and there's this giant stone snake staring you, and then it makes eye contact, and you start running, and it comes after you, and you're like, please no, please no, please no, please no.
Oh my goodness. It is one of those games that is on my list. I'd love to snag it. But dang, the other half of that is I see how much playtime people have put into it. Like, I don't have that time to play it.
Yeah. I think it's definitely a game that, I mean, most Pokemon games you could finish pretty decently. I think it's one of the better paced ones where you can't rush through it as easily as other games. If you aren't exploring, you're going to have to grind a little. Which I think works pacing wise. Like, in a lot of the other Pokemon games, you could just grind out early and then rush your way through the rest, sort of at pace. But here, because there's no random encounters in the same way, you have to choose to be in the encounter. If you're not doing a full exploration and catch, you're going to have to grind a little. Exactly.
Or you're going to have to, I know some people were using, I think, candies to level up real quick. And
if you just do a bunch of the Gigantamax battles, you get a bunch of candies, which is good for leveling if you don't want to explore, or for catching up a Pokemon that you caught that's like 20 levels behind your team.
Exactly. So we did Big Hero 6. We got Pokemon. And I have to say, one of the things that I love about Netflix is their willingness to take shows that I used to be into back in the 80s and upgrade them and make them into just incredible shows. I love their Voltron series, but the one that has caught my most recent attention, and it's one that my daughter really is into, and it's a shame that we haven't been able to go through the latest season as fast as we had, but She-Ra and the Princesses of Power is, I remember seeing the art style to begin with, and people were outraged about, oh, She-Ra doesn't look anything like the 80s She-Ra, and thank goodness that she doesn't look like 80s She-Ra. But I love I love the show. I love how they've built and layered the season with the stories. I love the characters, and I love the character
Yes.
design.
Yes, yeah, yes to all of it, honestly. The character design, I guess since that's what you left off with, it's just beautiful. Like the art style is gorgeous, but they also put so much effort into the diversity of the characters, but not in a like surface level, make them all the same and just put on a different like skin color. Each
Mhm.
character embodies an entirely different appearance, and like if they're drawn to be a specific way, it isn't just added on to the base character model. It's done with an attention to detail that like you're looking at a really well lived in world with just such beautiful characters.
It's one of those shows, honestly, where I really hope, because again, haven't seen the latest season all the way through. We finally did get to meet Double Trouble,
Double
which
Trouble is, I love
I
them.
love Double Trouble in so many different ways. But the thing that I hope that we get with She-Ra is I want to know more about the world pre like Horde coming.
Yeah.
I'd love to explore that. Whether that's happened or not in the latest season, I can't speak to it. But it's what because I always love like history and backstory and getting background of what the world was like, and especially pre Horde and pre
Yeah.
invasion type angle of what's happening. I want so much from the show, but they give me so much to begin with.
Yeah. I won't say much, but there's definitely some history exploration that's going to happen that season. So if that's what you're excited for, you're gonna get some of it.
Awesome.
But yeah, like it's a really good show. It's just one of those shows where, in the same vein of Big Hero 6, where it's got this emotional core to it, and a lot of the episodes are just really emotionally heavy. Like it deals with some complex topics of like trauma, abuse, the effects of those on people and how different people handle them. Like if you're looking at Catcher and Adora's story alone, not even anyone else.
Hmm.
While at the same time, it's just it's a fun, happy, feel good show a lot of the times. Like you just enjoy yourself while watching it, and then you get hit with some big emotional beats, and you deal with those, and then you feel happy again because the show makes you feel that way.
Exactly. I think there's one guest I had on, and we talked about She-Ra back before the latest season came on. And one of the things we both talked about is there's an episode, I think in the second season, where they're up in an ice area, and you get this connection between Scorpia and Seahawk,
Yeah.
and they have that just conversation, and it's just such a important conversation for these characters to have, and you just want to like I I love Scorpia. Like I just want to give Scorpia a hug and be like, I don't know what's going on, but you are like so good. Like I don't know why you're there.
Scorpia has some really, really good moments this season, which are very awesome. Like, and she's a character I love, and I think that's the other thing I really like about the show. Is there's the characters are all really well fleshed out, and there's going to be someone for everyone to latch onto in some
Mhm.
way. Like when I first watched, the characters that I kind of latch onto the most are Bo and Entrapta.
Mhm.
Entrapta, like, is a character who both just on the surface level of being like her interest in machines and technology, but also the way she goes about that interest and the way that she's not always necessarily connected to the world or people around her in the same way as everyone else, and that
Mhm.
sometimes causes complications is an aspect that I relate to. And at the same time, Bo being sort of this person with no powers, nothing to distinguish himself besides somehow being the emotional core of the group, uh, is a thing I really love. Like he's always there for his friends. That's his power. He doesn't have like teleportation or a giant sword that makes him unstoppable, but it's still a superpower.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those shows, especially like how you talk about Entrapta. Like there are times where just let me be in my room. I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to interact with the world. I just want to do what I'm doing. And I'm sorry if I wasn't paying attention or not giving you like the attention you thought you need. Like just
Yeah.
just let me be. But I think I love that the characters all have their like not only the way that they're drawn and the diverse representation that's out there, but I love that they're not cookie cutters. They all have their things that are going on, their interests, their hopes and dreams and desires. And like, I love Mermista.
Yeah.
I love her interaction with the rest of the princesses. I love Adora and Catra. I love Catra and Scorpia in a heartbreaking way of,
Yeah.
I just want to, again, Scorpia needs a hug.
Scorpion needs a lot of hugs.
And I'm digging Double Trouble from what we've seen, because we've only seen I think at this point it's either 1 or 2 episodes with them, and I really am excited to see what comes from their character in the future.
I love Double Trouble a lot. Like, I'm a non-binary person, and when I heard that like a main character in a show that I really loved was going to be that in the new season, I got excited. And I really enjoyed the representation. I've definitely heard some pretty valid critiques of it. And I'm hoping that those get addressed somewhat in the next seasons, but it's still really, really good.
Absolutely. And as you said, like, there is that representation, and it's really, again, kids show.
Yeah.
It's hard to, when I was watching kids shows, it was nothing like this. And even
Yes.
when my kids were younger, it wasn't anything where this is. And now you have these shows that they're watching where, and my kids are in middle school and elementary school, but they're seeing these representations in their shows that they're watching, and then they're coming to talk to
Yeah.
me and my wife about what they're seeing, and we're like, this is out there, like, this is
Yeah.
something that exists, and you need to understand it and appreciate it, not be like confused by it. If you are confused by it, then you come talk to us and we'll talk to you about it. But it's so great to see something where anybody, like, at this point, it's nice to have, like, if somebody's watching, they can find a show and find a character that they can identify with, and it's just wonderful.
And I think what really makes She-Ra stand out, in a way that I've heard also similar things from Steven Universe, but I have not watched that show personally, so I cannot speak to it. But that it's like that the head of like this project of recreating She-Ra is herself a queer woman, and a lot of the representation in She-Ra is done in a subtle way, whereas a lot of media that has representation that is written by members outside that group sort of feels need to call explicit attention to it, right? Double Trouble has never once asked what their pronouns are in the show. They never once introduced themselves using they them. People just use they them to them the first time you hear them gendered, and it just goes on like that. And a lot of other things in the show where the various aspects of representation and like queer identities are not needed to be made explicit because the people behind the creation of the show understand how to portray it in a realistic way that isn't constantly calling it out.
For She-Ra, who is your favorite character after watching the 3 seasons?
Yeah. I mean, I really do love Double Trouble. I think it still has to be Bo. Bo is just a character whom I deeply love. And his arc in season 2 with his dads is very good.
Oh my god, that was something when that episode aired, and we were like, oh, Bo, what, you didn't tell?
Bo, buddy. But like it was a really good way for them to do the equivalent of a like coming out story with a family who are very clearly not like going to be opposed to their son coming out, but they still did that sort of same story and captured that tension and nervousness and hiding a secret part of your identity because you're worried about the consequences of revealing it to your family.
Right, yeah.
Which is, again, like part of the show not having to explicitly do it as a coming out story. They could have done it as something else because very confident in their writing ability.
That is something where, like, every episode, sometimes it just requires a step and a moment to think about what they've put out, and just really enjoy getting to see how these characters are.
Yeah.
What is your hope for the next season of She-Ra? Like, where do you hope that they go with? Again,
Yeah.
haven't seen it, but what in broad terms would you love to see happen in the series?
Okay. I guess I would love to see a more Entrapta centered arc. Because she's been sort of thrown around by the whims of fate in the first 2 seasons a lot. And ends up getting majorly betrayed by Catra at the end of season 2. And it leaves her in this weird spot when she already had a weird relationship with regards to other people. And I'd love to see that being explored more, and like her being able to reform bonds with other people after what happened at season 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what I would love to see more of.
Okay. So we've covered all these great fandoms, but the thing again that connected you and I together is tabletop role playing.
Yeah.
How did you first get into tabletop role playing?
Okay. So 3 years ago, which is my freshman year of college, one of my dorm mates, who became one of my closest friends here, mentioned that he had bought the Pathfinder Red Box from a yard sale. Which is this beginner adventure in Pathfinder, which is a spin-off system from Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 edition.
Mm-hmm.
Which was really beloved by a lot of people, so Paizo made a version of the game that was just, what if we kept developing this one version of D&D instead of moving on to new versions? And so I ran a one-shot of that fizzled out just because of life and like friend groups shifting, as is wont to do in freshman year of college.
Mm-hmm.
But then in spring, 3 years ago, I got a group together, and I, having never played the game before, GM'd for them for about 4 months until summer hit, and then GM'd for a small subset online over the summer. And I did that, and I had a decent amount of fun, but I was quickly realizing that Pathfinder wasn't for me. And I thought it just meant RPGs weren't for me, because I didn't know that there was anything beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
But my friend who got the Red Box introduced me to Film Reroll Podcast, which is a podcast where they take movies and take the basic premise. The GM makes character sheets for all the characters in the movies, and they roll through it using the generic GURPS system.
Okay.
So they've done like a lot of movies. In terms of this movie, Frozen is one of the ones they've done. I would say it's definitely our podcast most of the time, but I like R-rated.
Okay.
But it was the podcast that got me into listening to podcasts. So I listened to that. I caught up on all their backlog at the time, which wasn't much because it was still relatively new. And then I went to the internet and I was like, okay, what are some good RPG podcasts? And then I found out the term actual play, and I found out about the One Shot podcast, which is a podcast run by James D'Amato, where they play a different RPG system for a single session, which is roughly 4 episodes each month. And so I started listening through their backlog, and it was pretty good. There were some ones that made me laugh and that hooked me along. And then I got to their Star Wars one. And Star Wars is another fandom that I've loved a lot of the spin-off materials a lot, and this kind of captured the aspects of the stuff that I love from shows like the Clone Wars and Rebels.
Mm-hmm.
So I listened to that episode, and then found out that they made it a full campaign. So I binged all of campaign, which was about not a lot of episodes at the time, because it's still 3 years ago, but it was like 60 episodes or so in 2 weeks.
Wow.
I played a lot of Civilization 5 at the time. That was what how I listened to a lot of it, by having something that I could play that didn't require much reading. But I did that, and from there I got introduced to the one-shot community from Discord, and kind of spiraled from there. I designed a game for like the 200-word RPG challenge a year later, and then started doing game design through listening to the Stop Hack and Roll podcast. And to bring it full circle to Big Hero 6, they had a podcast called Protein City Comics, which is a Masks RPG podcast, Masks being a teenage superhero role-playing game that, as we know, I really love that genre. So I listen to the podcast. I really like the podcast, and it's from there that I've just kind of been going on.
I still can't believe you binged that many episodes of campaign. It's mind blowing.
I've binged a lot of podcasts in way less time than one should binge any amount of podcasts. Without even meaning to, one of my friends does another Mask podcast called Rollout Podcast, and I listened to their entire first season, which was a lot of audio, in about a week and a half. And then someone else heard about it and decided to match my marathon, which means I got my friend another fan, so I call that a win.
Hey, as long as anyone's getting more ears on their podcast, that's always a win.
Yeah.
What attracts you to tabletop role playing?
Yeah. So I used to do writing, and it's a thing that I'm trying to get back into. But I always enjoyed that aspect of like storytelling and world building, and that's what drew me to be a GM in the first place. And what's drawn me to continue playing and exploring new systems is the collaborative aspect to it, where I can sit down and type some words onto a page and tell a pretty cool story, I would say. But I can tell an infinitely cooler story when I have people who aren't me bouncing off ideas, because as if I was the best writer and smartest person in the entire world, I would still only be one person. I'd still only have that one perspective and set of experiences that could never capture everything. And it's really fun to say something and watch someone else be like, okay, but yes, and this. And I'm just like, that's genius. I could never have come up with that because I would never see that thing in that way. Yes. And the stories that come out of it are just really cool. And you end up with this experience that none of you could have created by yourself. And you all know that you did that together.
That is probably the best answer that I've heard. I love, like, that is something where when I got into tabletop gaming in college and making stories where it was fun and campy, but then you had those emotional beats between the characters or between like what was going on, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's one of those things where I'm always wanting to go back to have more tabletop gaming, or more like just getting involved in something, even peripherally of getting involved, so that way I can just be a part of the story or listening to the story, which again, I love when I had time to listen to my actual play podcast, because there's so many good ones out there that just, they suck you in. There's been podcast episodes of shows where like I've laughed so hard I'm crying, or on the flip side, something happens and it makes me just like start to tear up because like it's just so well done.
Yeah, there's a lot of those pieces of media that pulled me in various ways and have left their mark on me in a bunch of ways. That it's just uniquely honest, I think, in a lot of ways. Like, obviously it's still edited and performed a lot of the times, but there's a more human aspect to it than a TV show in some ways. Like, in the sense that you get this experience of people who are playing a game and having fun, and you get to partake in that fun.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, when you're playing it yourself, yeah, 100% on just the fun campiness with emotional beats. Like, the first character I ever played was also a masked character. His name was Dylan. No last name, because anytime someone tried to say his last name, a loud noise would happen over an airplane flying nearby or a bus honking its horn. His superhero name was The Coincidence, because he would always happen to be in the right place at the right time. And his superpowers were a blue belt in karate, which is barely an intermediate belt, and a acrobatics he learned on his trampoline in the backyard. He was this kid who definitely had no right to be there amongst the other two teammates, one of whom was the literal creation of like the power of light incarnate. But it was this fun campy game where there were moments where a lot of us cried at various points because just some of the emotional beats hit hard, and you can do that with other people and have fun.
Exactly. And you don't need to worry, like, you don't need to worry if your character's not the best, the strongest, the fastest,
No.
the smartest. Like, you can have those characters and just roll with it and do great things and fun things and just build stories. And it's so good.
And the beautiful part is you can find a game in a group for whatever your interests are. Like, you might not be able to find it in person. I have not gamed with a physical group outside of visiting friends or a convention in a while, but I do a lot of online gaming. And if you want a heavy, tactical, crunchy game where you and your friends are being serious about the fighting and like having the biggest numbers, you can find that. If you want a campy, emotional game, you can find that. If you want to do the self-indulgent Dragon Ball Z fan fiction you've always dreamed of, my friends and I have also done that. You can do whatever you want. Like, my friends and I are currently doing playing through the Phantom Menace, just as Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Padme, and Parshpanaka. And it's gone vastly off key. We joke around half the time and don't progress anything, and we have a blast because you can just do that.
Exactly. And you bring up like that you can play pretty much any game, and I've talked with a number of people where we talk about the time period that we live in. You can find any game, like anything you want to do, there's a game out there.
Yeah.
Or people are making those games so that way you can play them. It blows me away that we have a game came out, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's like working in a record store or CD store.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I'm blanking on the name, but yeah, there's one that comes to mind.
Oh, it's Damn the Man. That's
Damn the
what it
Man
is.
by Hannah Schaefer, right?
Yes.
Yes. I was looking up Hannah Schaefer's name because, like, I know the person who made this game. I just don't remember the name of the game.
Yes, and like that's the thing where I love the tabletop community more and more every day, and I love finding new people every day because there are people creating these wonderful games that are exploring not only like role playing games, but just storytelling games where you just talk with each other and you flip a card over and react to whatever the card says, and it's mind-blowingly like such a great time period that we live in.
Oh yeah, there's so many cool games that like vary from a full heavy campaign game where you make in-depth characters and you're playing with your friends for once a week for a bunch of months, to here's a bunch of cards, sit down for 30 minutes to 2 hours and tell a story and you're done. And it makes it so much easier for you to pick up a game right for any situation.
It is. It's something where when I first got into tabletop gaming, I could never have imagined the change in how the business was, or that there's so many talented people out there because of how it was set up back then. Of you have these books, you go to your comic book store, your game store, and you find them, and that's kind of how you get into it, and hope to gosh that you find somebody that's wanting to play something that's not like Dungeons and Dragons. That was always our thing, was we would play Dungeons and Dragons, but we'd try like other games like Vampire or Werewolf or Star Wars, and we'd mix them in. But now there's so many different things that if you can find the right group of people, you can play anything out there.
And honestly, if I had been stuck with only playing Pathfinder, I probably would not be here right now. Like, nothing wrong with Pathfinder, but it does not have the style of play I enjoyed, and it actively made me start to not enjoy my time towards the end, which is why I stopped the group, because you don't have to play a game you don't enjoy, it's your free time. And there's other options now, like online everywhere. And there's a lot of options that are being, like, people are working more and more on increasing sort of the accessibility to those options. There's a lot of games that are free or that people have discounted their community copies for. That's a new thing on itch where a lot of designers will release community copies, which are just copies you can claim. Some designers will allow you to pay extra to donate a community copy. I know a model that I've used for one of my games and that other designers have used are every time someone pays for a copy, you just throw an extra one free into the pile for someone else to claim. And there's also podcasts, a lot more podcasts than there were when I started listening even 3 years ago. That means whatever system you want to learn, you can probably listen to someone else play it and figure out if it's what you want before you spend your time reading and playing it.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, putting down some of the money for it if you're buying a hardback book or even a softcover book.
Yeah, because they can like experimenting with different systems can definitely rack up some money depending on which systems you're checking out. And if you are interested in doing that, definitely a thing that I would encourage. And there's ways to do that aren't as expensive, like I mentioned. Listening to other people play it is one of the best ways, because there's a lot of really cool systems, especially with all the stuff being done on itch right now.
Oh, totally. As far as games that you've played and enjoyed that you would recommend to others, what would be like your top 3-ish of what you would recommend for people to try out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Masks is top one for a bunch of reasons. If you're looking like who doesn't love superheroes? Most people love superheroes, and it's a pretty simple to learn system. It's not got a lot of math to it. It does have some things you have to kind of grasp, but if you haven't played other role-playing games before, it's a pretty good onboarding tool, in my opinion, especially with a GM or a player who knows what they're doing playing that game. And it's about telling teenage superhero stories. It's a game about identity and figuring out who you are in the world as a kind of kid growing up, but also you're not just a normal kid growing up. You're a kid who can maybe blow up the building next door if you make too big a mistake, which whoops. That's my number one. The second one that I really like is the Star Wars RPG and Genesis system. So the Fantasy Flight game Star Wars RPG system. And they then created a generic version called Genesis if you don't like Star Wars, that allows you to play in almost any setting. The fan community has been amazing at creating a bunch of setting documents. Like I mentioned that I played a Dragon Ball Z game with a group of friends in it, and that was with a fan document that created rules for here's how to make like a Saiyan and a Mechian, etc. from Dragon Ball Z. It's a system I really love because it doesn't have numbers. It does have unique dice, which take a bit of a learning curve to learn, but it is a nice balance between crunchy mechanical combat and encounters and narrative support and tools and talents and abilities that lead you towards being more narratively oriented. And a third one, oh gosh, let's see. I mean, on the third one, I think like there's a lot of games that I haven't played personally that I've fallen in love with. Actually, for the third one, I'll go completely in the opposite direction. If you want a storytelling game, I would recommend checking out Dialect, which is a game by Forney Games about a dying language. You explicitly play a community that gets isolated from sort of the main community, and you, using a bunch of story cards and prompts, play out the evolution of the language. You, as a table, create a bunch of new words, a bunch of new phrases, all with unique meanings that exist in the specific situation of that community. And the game ends with the community ending its isolation and the language dying.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's a really powerful shared experience because you end up with it. You and your group of friends now have this new language and new set of words that only make sense within the context of your game and your friend group.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Now, you also not only like do you run games and play games, but you create and design games.
Yeah.
What's your I don't want to say your niche or your style of games that you create, but what do you create?
Yeah. I mean, currently I have one completely out game, and it's a card-based game that uses poker, like the traditional card game of poker, as the main resolution mechanic for the game. Because I wanted to take the concept of, well, all right, we have all these RPGs that use dice, but we have all these other games that people are familiar with, and there's games out there that use Jenga as a resolution system, non-trademark tumbling block tower. But there's games like Dread, which use it for horror, or Starcrossed, which use it for romance and the romantic tension building up. And there's games that use like that really effectively. And there's other games that use regular just decks of cards, but as decks of cards. And I was wondering, well, what if we tied it to something people were more familiar with? So I made a cowpoke storytelling game, which is about telling stories of cowboys at the end of the sort of quote Wild West period, where you are playing a bunch of cowpokes who are, actively being pushed out because the need for cowpokes is diminishing. You don't need them as there's less and less open ranges to send people, and the only people who are kind of left trying to do these jobs are people who are pushed out by society. So that's the one game I have out. The other games I'm working on are mostly in a system called Powered by the Apocalypse, which is the same system that Masks uses, inspired by the game Apocalypse World. And it's this more narrative-oriented game system in which I'm making a Pokemon game, is one of them actually. Because, well, there's a couple Pokemon RPGs out there, but the biggest one that's created focuses on emulating the video games a lot. And it gives you spreadsheets and stuff to do all the video game math. And it's a really cool system. I like it a lot, but it is really numerically intensive. And this is coming from someone who loves math and does it in their free time. But I wanted to make a game that's focused on the spirit of the anime and the idea of like friendship and growth. And my friend Chris Foster also had the same idea, so we've been working on that together, along with making a podcast as we test our way through it and break the system and make it work again.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah. The other big game I'm working on is called Chimera, which one of the things about Powered by the Apocalypse systems is all the games, as you play through them, have very specific focuses. Like Masks is explicitly about playing teenage superheroes struggling with identity. There's a bunch of other ones that all have narrow focuses. Pasión de las Pasiones is about playing telenovelas. It's a really fun game created by Brendan Gabetta, who's a Latinx man who made all these very beautifully constructed moves and archetypes so that you kind of get on board into this telenovela experience, even if you don't have much of the cultural touchstone for it. But Chimera, which is a game I'm making with my friend Ryan Bowalter, throws away that concept and is like, well, what if we tried to make a Powered by the Apocalypse game but generic, so that anyone could bring their own world and stories and create their own game if there's a current lack in whatever game they want to play in this genre. So we've been messing with the idea of these genre packages that you blend together, so you could choose fantasy and superhero and create a world that combines both those aspects and both those tropes and both those characters to tell whatever story you wanted within it.
That is, I know I've been following Chimera on Twitter. I'm looking it up right now just to double check. And I was like, because I remember hearing about it because I had seen posts, I believe, probably from you and from Ryan about it, and how it sounded so cool from what everyone had been talking about, and it's something that's on my radar. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, it's a heavy project, so we're doing a lot of testing and redesigning because it's trying to do a lot of lifting. But we're starting to like iteration by iteration. We're on like version 0.7. I got on board at around version 0.4. Ryan was working on this by himself. And then they decided that they needed someone else to join, so he asked me to come on board. And I've been helping out for a year now.
Awesome. And you're also on podcasts.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Chris does the Playtest podcast, which is a podcast he started for his own game, which is a Cowboy Bebop game called Hard Space Hustle, where he would playtest it once a month and do like developers logs as sort of a accountability to make sure he was actually working on his game. And he finished everything he wanted till he's now working on a beta version for it. So while he was doing that, he's like, hey, we have this Pokemon system that we should get some tests of. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, well, let's do that. So we've been playing a campaign of that with a wonderful cast, and we've been having a couple guests come on who are also phenomenal people. And it's just been a really good Pokemon story. Like, if you like good Pokemon media and you want to have people having fun together, enjoying the world of Pokemon, it's a beautiful story for that. I'm on the Musafir's podcast, which is a Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition podcast, currently run by Miriam in their own setting, Serzamin, which is a Southeast Asia inspired fantasy setting, which I've been enjoying a lot because it's a setting that lacks proper representation in fantasy, especially in Dungeons and Dragons modules, like having Middle East, African, Asian, East Asian settings are all things that are lacking. So having someone making this Southeast Asian setting because they come from that background, it's been really cool to explore. Because I'm personally Egyptian, so I'm not Southeast Asian, but it's been a really powerful experience to be a part of. And those are the main two currently.
Okay. I know that there's been a lot of I don't know, I can't say a lot, but I know that there's been some recent projects where you're getting settings based on like Southeast Asia, and I can't remember the name of the Kickstarter that just happened.
Ross Rifles, or
Not Ross Rifles. It was the other. I think it's based on the Philippines.
Philippines? Oh,
I
know.
can't
So
remember.
there was Thousand Arrows a while back that's based in Japan.
But-
So the Filipino design scene's got a lot of really cool work coming out of it, and they've recently started reaching out and sharing their work with us. But they've been a bustling design scene for years, and there's some really cool people spearheading that process, who have started sharing. Like, a lot of the stuff they've been working with has been phenomenal. A game that recently came out from their Balak Bayan, by Jamie, is a beautiful cyberpunk game based in the Philippines, and there's a lot of folks pushing in these scenes. Like, we have for a variety of representation in all sorts of backgrounds, and that's, I think, one of the beautiful parts of the indie scene currently, is because of the internet and a space like itch to self-publish, making it a lot more viable to do so. You're getting a lot of more people who traditionally haven't had the avenue to create their own settings in tabletop games come out. Like, there's a lot of Egypt settings in fantasy. Like, there's a lot of mummy fiction. There's a lot of Egyptian god fiction. Almost none of it has involved an Egyptian person or even a Muslim person in any capacity, right?
Exactly. And yeah, that's what I was like going with, is that you're getting actual designers who have lived that experience or are in the culture. And the Philippines book that I was thinking of, I pulled it up, is The Islands of Sina Una.
Yes. Okay.
And that was the one that I had my eye on, and unfortunately I had to stop Kickstarters for a while.
I know of the Islands of Sina Una. That's also a really really good one, and I'm glad it got through. There's a lot of cool projects coming out and like, the beauty of a hobby like this is you don't have to be caught up with every single project, but you will be able to find the project that hits your interests.
Exactly. There's so many. I mean, even if like, and I think the one thing that I always try to do when I see these projects is, even if I can't back them myself, like, I want to just get that word out there that they exist, and for people to go check them out.
Yeah, definitely. You obviously can't back and support every project, but you can definitely promote them. I try to promote all the cool projects I see because there's a lot of cool work being done.
Exactly. Now, you've stuck with me for a lot longer than the hour that I kind of, go with. And I really want to just say I appreciate like everything that we've had and we talked about today. And for people that have listened to the end of this episode and want to find you on the internets, what are some of the best places to do so?
Yeah, so I am usually found places as Ammourazz. That's Ammourazz. That's my Twitter handle. That's my itch place. If you want to find my games, that'll be like itch.io/Ammourazz. Those are the kind of two best places to find me. If you end up in a bunch of game design or podcast discords, chances are you will run into me somewhere because I am in way too many for my own good. But yeah. Other than that, the podcasts I mentioned are great ways to hear my voices. If you enjoyed this, I mentioned the two that I'm on consistently, but I'll also plug the Protein City Comics podcast. Had me on as a guest a little bit back in the #Team Champions comics, in which I play a Egyptian superhero who is trying to reclaim a mantle that had been previously used by a British archaeologist to be a superhero. It's a pretty cool episode. My co-guest Alice Kira did a phenomenal job with her character as well. So it's another great place to hear my voice in a much more 2-episode format before launching into the longer podcast.
Awesome. Well, I will have all the links to your Twitter and itch and the podcasts on our show notes and Facebook page and website.
Perfect.
So that way everyone can go check you out, and definitely check out the itch, because I looked over your game and it sounds really cool, and I may have to earmark some money next month to pick it up and play it with my kids, because my kids, shockingly, over the summer learned how to play poker.
Oh, nice.
And you have never lived until you have your 10-year-old going all in on hands, and you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah, because you never know. Do they have a good hand, or are they bluffing you?
And with kids, you have no idea. Like, one of them's just like all in every time. Like, you okay.
It's like, I'm not, do I want to call that? Yeah.
But I really wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come on and talk with me about all your fandoms and the tabletop scene. And I'm just so looking forward to seeing what you start getting out with more publishing and the different projects you've got going on.
Thank you. I've got some things that I'm working on, both for myself and just in general, that I'm pretty excited about, and we'll be screaming about on Twitter when they come out. So that's usually the best place to keep up to date with that. And if there is ever another place, you will find it through the Twitter.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.